The National Catholic Broadcasting Council presents Mission 2008, Keeping a Mellow Heart in a Bitter Time, with Father Ron Rolheiser of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. Father Ron Rolheiser was born in Saskatchewan, is currently president of the School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas. He is a speaker, columnist, and author. Father Ron Rolheiser.
Keeping a mellow heart in a bitter time. Ultimately, that's the real struggle, particularly at the end of our spiritual lives. What I want to do with you is really three things. I want to talk a little bit about that struggle to keep a mellow heart, and more briefly, and then at some length, I want to try to define what is a mellow heart. What would it mean to have a mellow heart? And then the third piece will be what kind of prayer could help us to get there. So to have a mellow heart in a bitter time. I want to begin with two stories, just to kind of contextualize this and set it. The first one comes from Nikos Kazantzakis, the great Greek writer. As you know, he's the man who wrote the book Zorba the Greek. But he was a wonderful writer, and he was a very deep author. And later on in life, he was already dying of cancer, and he wrote a book called Report to Greco, which is kind of a spiritual autobiography. And in there he talks about his youth, and as a young man of 19, for a while he thought he'd become a monk. He was very religious, and he spent one summer up on Mount Athos in a monastery. So you have to picture him, an intense 19-year-old writer. And he talks about an old priest, monk, Father Macarius, that he met in the monastery. And he said he used to have these marvelous conversations with old Father Macarius. And one day he asked this old man, he says, Father, he said, you're in your 80s. He said, do you still struggle with the devil? Do you still have wrestling matches with the devil? And the old man said, no. He said, I used to. He said, when I was younger, I wrestled with the devil. He said, but now I've grown old and tired, and the devil's grown old and tired with me. I leave him alone, he leaves me alone. So the young writer said, Kazantzakis said, your life is easy then now. He said, oh no. He said, it's much harder now. He says, now I wrestle with God. That's much harder than wrestling with the devil. Now I wrestle with God. See, during the early part of life, a lot of spiritual writers, including myself, divide life into what we call the two halves of life. And simplistically put, during the first half of life, a lot of our struggles are quotation marks with the devil. We wrestle with, the energies of youth, ambition, greed, pleasure, sexuality, restlessness that drive us around. But later on, the struggle is not so much with that. The struggle becomes with anger, with bitterness, with forgiveness, with letting go of our wounds, with precisely not being bitter. The second story, I'm going to tell you a second story to complement this first one. Some years ago, I was hearing confessions in a church on a Saturday night. And if you're a Roman Catholic priest hearing confessions on a Saturday night, that's when you hear the good confessions, the regular ones, the people who go every week or every second week, usually don't have a lot of stuff to confess. And this woman came in and she says, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. She said, my last confession was just last week. I go every week. She said, and I don't really have a lot of things to confess. She said, I'm 52 or whatever her age was. She said, I'm in my 50s. I'm married, kids. The kids are growing. She said, and I'm your basic good person. She said, but lately, my struggle says, I just find myself filling with anger all the time. And I don't know why. She said, I love my husband, but some days I'd like to kill him. And I like my kids, and most days I'd like to kill them. And I belong to this parish, and some days I want to strangle everybody there. So I get all this anger inside of me. He said, where's it all coming from? He said, what's wrong with me? I said, well, there isn't anything wrong with you. See, that becomes the deep struggle of the second half of life. Somebody once said kind of like almost like a quip, but it's had its own depth. And somebody said, we spend the first half of our lives wrestling with the sixth commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. Our struggles with sexuality and restlessness. We spend the second half of our lives struggling with the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. Because long before anybody's ever shot with a gun, they are shot with a word. And long before anybody's ever shot with a word, they're shot by a thought. Who does she think she is? Who does he think he is? She thinks she's so smart. See, we're always killing. When we were kids, and many of you are Catholics, remember that, and when we were young people, we were invited, when we went to confession, to confess bad thoughts to the priest. Well, but bad thoughts meant, as a young person, meant sexual fantasies. Notice this woman, what she's confessing to the priest, she's confessing bad thoughts. She said, I want to murder people most of the time. See, that's the struggle, and that's actually the deeper struggle. Notice when, in the parable of the prodigal son and the older brother, the younger son, what are his struggles? He's struggling precisely with restlessness, with sexuality, with going out and seeing the world and kind of taming and channeling all his energies. He's wrestling with the devil. But notice the older brother, he is wrestling with his father. The father is God. And notice he's outside the house and his father has to come out and try to coax him into a certain joy. He's joyless, even though he's doing everything right. His struggle is very, very much with anger, with letting go, with forgiveness. There's a Swiss psychologist, Alice Miller, who's one of the great psychologists of the past century. And some years ago, she wrote this book called The Drama of the Gifted Child. But when she defines the gifted child, she doesn't define the gifted child as the child who has this astronomical IQ. The gifted child for her is the sensitive person. That's you. So people are born normal people with great sensitivity. And what happens precisely because we have the sensitivity, we get hurt a lot. We don't get loved well as kids. We fall too often. We're, picked on too often. Things aren't right. Our lives don't turn out right. And what happens? And when we get into midlife, and midlife begins sometime after 35 years of age, we get into midlife, and all these wounds begin to break through.